So I'm recording this on Halloween. Hopefully the lighting is dramatic enough. We'll see how it comes out. Welcome to another episode of Visions of Tomorrow, a series where I review science fiction movies from the past. Today I'm taking a look at The Fly, the science fiction movie from 1958, and maybe some of its sequels. As always, this video will most definitely contain spoilers, so if you have not seen the film, make sure you watch it before you watch this video. I'm not going anywhere. Alright, so let's dive in. Although you'd never know it, we're in Montreal, Canada, where all the mad scientists are, as the film opens to the gruesome murder of Andre Delambre, played by David Hedison, crushed under the hydraulic press. His wife, Helene, played by Patricia Ownes, immediately assumes the blame for the murder. While still in a state of panic and shock, she calls her brother-in-law, Vincent Price, Francois Delambre, to confess to the murder and asks him to call the police. The thing is, everyone has a hard time believing her story. Neither Francois, nor Dr. Ajout, the doctor who's attending her, nor Inspector Shiraz really believe that she is a murderer. She's too nice of a person, and as far as everyone knows, her marriage with Andre was perfect. It just doesn't make sense. Yet she's adamant in her confession, so they keep her under observation, with the most likely explanation that she's gone insane. Meanwhile, Philippe, her son, is staying with Francois for his safety. There are a few hints to a deeper truth, however. Helene seems overly disturbed when she hears the buzzing of a fly in a room. Late during dinner, Philippe brings up a strange fly with a white head that he was chasing earlier. Francois suspects that this fly business has something to do with it, as ridiculous as that sounds. He eventually convinces Helene to tell the whole story, which she does in front of him and Inspector Shiraz. Okay, so time for a long flashback. Andre was a scientist working on a number of inventions, the latest of which is astonishing, a teleporting device which he calls the disintegrator integrator because, well, that's what it does, literally. Not a bad one as far as names go. He's excited to share this invention with his wife, who is happy for him, though she does question the morality of playing God like that. Andre doesn't succumb to this kind of superstition. If successful, this invention could change the world. There's still a few kinks to work out, however. He tests the device on inanimate objects and animals, and eventually on himself, and everything seems to work great. But he gets cocky and decides to test it on himself one more time. Without him realizing, a fly sneaks into the teleportation chamber when he's not looking, with disastrous result. We all know what happened, or what probably happened. The film is called The Fly after all, but the story takes its sweet time to building up to this reveal. Andre keeps his face and hand hidden as he asks for his wife's assistance in solving the problem. He can't even talk, he communicates by typing notes. Andre thinks he can reverse the process, but they need to catch the fly that got transported with him in the first place, the one with the white head, which, if you think about it, is kind of an impossible task. How do you catch a random fly when there's presumably many? Nevertheless, Helene tries her best. She recruits the boy, Philippe, then the housekeeper, and they get close to capturing it, but alas, the fly escapes. She asks Andre to be patient. They'll get the fly eventually, but he's just about ran out of time. His mind is slowly overtaking, and he's losing control over his actions. There's no choice. He must die. He convinces his wife to take him to the hydraulic press and to crush his head and hand, so there's no evidence of his transformation. And that brings us to the point where the movie started. Once all's been said and confessed, Inspector Shiraz doesn't really believe her story, but he's heard enough to declare her insane. At least she won't hang for the crime. However, soon after they discover a spider's web in the garden, and caught in it, the strange fly with the white head. Upon closer examination, Shiraz and Francois sees Andre's head and arm on the fly, just as it's about to be devoured by the spider. Panicked, Inspector Shiraz grabs a rock and smashes both the spider and the fly, killing whatever's left of Andre in the process. Still in shock, both Andre and Francois decide it's best to rule Andre's death and suicide, and keep this whole horrid affair a secret. In the end, Francois, Helene, and Philippe can live the rest of their lives in peace. Until the next movie, anyway. The Fly is an iconic title and an iconic franchise, from the original short story by George Langelaan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I apologize. To the film series that followed it. In my experience, now the franchise is discussed more in the context of horror movies than in the science fictional context, especially after the Cronenberg version came out in the 80s. Although before that, I would guess the science fictional aspect was perhaps a little bit more dominant. At least all the interviews that I found while researching this movie that I read that were pre-1986 when the remake came out referred it to more as a science fiction movie. Obviously, that's what I want to focus on. So let's forget about Cronenberg and that pretty boy Goldblum for a second and focus on the 1958 original movie. The 1958 version is essentially a B movie that ended up being way better and way more culturally impactful than anyone making it would have possibly expected, or maybe even hoped for. The film was hugely successful at the time, and given the success of the Cronenberg remake in the 80s, its historical impact is also pretty clear. Well, maybe it's not that surprising. Well, the project that would eventually result in The Fly started its life as a B-movie at Fox Studios, or rather its subsidiaries. Several people at Fox recognized the potential of the movie and gave it a significantly higher budget than would have been typically given to a B-movie at the time. And in the end, the movie was released directly by 20th Century Fox, rather than the subsidiary Regal Films, which did all the B-movies for Fox at the time. That certainly wasn't true for the sequels to the original, which were done with a much smaller budget and are much lesser known, although I'm not sure that the two facts are correlated. By the way, in preparation for this video, I read The Fly at 50, The Creation and Legacy of a Science Fiction Film. As the title suggests, it's a book written about the 50th anniversary of The Fly, which was released in 2008. That's when it's about 50 years, I suppose, and contains analysis, interviews, and several historical facts about the production of The Fly. So any historical details that I mention in this video, just assume that I got them from this book, as it was an invaluable source while researching this movie. Anyway, going back to The Fly, it all started as a short story that was published in Playboy in 1957, just a year before the film, actually, written by George Langelaan. It may sound strange, but Playboy did publish quite a little bit of fiction at the time, and it still does, I think, including science fiction. Notable science fiction writers such as Kurt Vonnegut, Ursula Le Guin, J.G. Ballard, and more have all published their stories in Playboy. The story itself is enjoyable and fairly close to the first film, with only a few minor differences, such as changing the setting from Paris to Montreal, although the first film barely mentions the fact that it is set in Montreal, I think, except maybe some signs on police cars and ambulance or some very minor hints here or there. It could have just been set in France, the audience wouldn't really know. The sequels do a lot more to emphasize the Montreal setting. The other big difference between the movie and the original short story is the ending, and I wouldn't describe the film's ending as a happy one, but it's slightly more positive than the short story where Helene ends her life after her confession. I had seen the film more than once, but I had not read the short story until a few days ago, and I must say I found it rather underwhelming when I did. Langelaan's writing style, which I found somewhat simplistic, didn't really do much to sell the emotion, or maybe even the horror of the story, as well as the movie does, speaking about the first movie. Which is saying a lot considering how faithful the adaptation is, but also perhaps not surprising. The Fly may be one of those stories that is much more effective on screen than it is on the page. You have the acting, the cinematography, the special effects, the soundtrack, all add an extra layer to the screen version that is missing from the written version. And I think Langelaan's relatively simplistic writing style is not sophisticated enough to make up for these shortcomings. The promise of a great story is definitely there, and perhaps that's what the producers at Fox saw when they purchased the adaptation and upgraded its budget. It was also included in 1958 in the Best Science Fiction of the Year anthology, which has been coming out every year. There's multiple now, but that's a different story. And it came out at the same year as the movie. I'm not sure in terms of months if it came out, if it was included in the anthology after the movie came out, maybe after the movie was announced. I'm not sure. Nevertheless, I think it's hard to say how recognizable the story would have remained today had it not been for the successful movie franchise that followed it. In my opinion, the first movie succeeds because it exceeds the expectation of its category, that of a relatively cheap science fiction B-movie. Often in interviews you hear with movie professionals, actors, directors, etc., where they claim that they always know when they're working on a bad movie. And by all accounts, and I read quite a few, the people who made The Fly took it seriously and knew that this could be something special. Except maybe for Vincent Price, who kept cracking up throughout the filming of the movie, especially in the scene where the Fly screams, help me," with a high-pitched voice. And I can see why that is funny. But otherwise, everyone involved in the making of the film knew that this could end up be something good and successful, and indeed that's what happened. But Vincent Price aside, the film takes itself just seriously enough to rise above what would have been a typical B-monster movie. The authors of the book that I mentioned, The Fly at 50, attribute part of its success to the fact that they chose to invest enough in the movie to shoot it in color, which perhaps did contribute to the film's immediate sort of commercial success, since color would have still been an innovative gimmick at the time. But I don't know if the color aspect of it is such a big deal, especially considering on the historical success of the movie over the years. They use the color relatively well in the movie, especially in some scenes with the red blood after the murder or the fly reveal, however brief that is. But I also think that there is a universe where this movie was made in black and white and was still very successful and as historically and culturally impactful as the actual movie ended up being. Similarly, I don't think the sequels failed because they were made in black and white. I think there's a lot more to the movie than simply deciding to make it in color. The visual effects and the makeup effects, like the fly mask or the teleportation effect, however briefly they appear in the movie, among other things, are done fairly well considering some of the budget constraints. But what really comes through, in my opinion, besides the story, which I'll get to, which is also obviously a big part for the success of the movie, but something that stands out is the acting, in my opinion. One thing that the short story doesn't handle very well is the individuality of each character and the way that each character is distinct from one another. It sort of goes through the motions. In the movie, that quality comes through much better, in large part due to the acting. There's a strange, almost eerie calmness to the performances, especially that of Vincent Price. From the moment he answers the phone at the beginning of the movie to the very last scene where he's talking with Philippe and Helene, he plays the characters always in a calm and composed manner. Vincent Price is probably the most recognizable name in the movie, and he tends to grab the attention in every movie or every scene he acts in. That's how good he is. Although in this movie, it's important to remember that he's only a supporting actor. Al Hedison, or David Hedison as he was known later, and Patricia Ownes as husband and wife, Andrea and Helene, have probably the most screen time in the movie. Their relationship on screen is really effective. The two actors have a lot of chemistry together and really sell the romance. In many ways, the film is a tragic romance movie for which the performances of the two romantic leads, so to speak, are crucial to the success of the story. There are many memorable scenes in the movie, but the one that stands out, especially in the context of the romantic angle of the movie, is the one with Andre, where in his last conscious moment before the fly overtakes his brain as he struggles to beg his wife one last time to kill him, for one final act, he manages to write the words "I love you" on the blackboard before they go off to the hydraulic press and the rest of the movie proceeds. I found that really moving in general. It's also noteworthy that for a decent chunk of the film, Hedison has to act with either a mask or a cover over his head, which is always challenging for actors, though he does a pretty good job at it. It's always impressive when actors have to convey a lot of emotion through just their physical movements without relying on their facial expressions or dialogue to do the work for them. The moral of The Fly is fairly simple, I would argue, but interesting nevertheless. The 1950s were a time of rapid technological expansion, something that was not always seen favorably. People saw both the increasing destructive power of technology, i.e. the atomic bomb, as well as our increasing dependence on it, something that the short story comments quite explicitly. There is no shortage of movies that one way or another commented on the atomic bomb and the atomic age, and in a way The Fly is sort of part of that general reaction, a little more broadly represented, of course. Andre is ecstatic about how his invention is going to change the world. There's this implication that we're at a breakneck race towards a technological utopia without really examining the path that leads us there. This weirdly parallels modern times, but let's not get into that right now. In one scene, Helene comments specifically on how fast things are moving, and in the end, the accident happens because Andre rushes the testing of his invention on himself. Although, for all the criticisms towards technology, I suppose there is an alternate universe out there where Andre follows all the safety protocols and nothing bad happens, so his invention does indeed change the world. But that would not make for an interesting movie. So you could say, and this argument has been made many times, that this is a movie about trying to play God gone wrong, or Frankenstein and his monster sort of thing. Although I don't know, because teleporting albeit extraordinary, is not quite equivalent to playing God, I don't think, the way that Frankenstein is, for example, which involves the literal creation of life. Still, Andre's demise comes through his own invention, so the pattern still kind of fits, I suppose. Some things are better left unexplored, seems to be the message of the movie, whether you agree with it or not. Ironically, Fox Studios didn't apply that motto to itself because they kept making more movies. The first film makes the case that some technological advancements are too dangerous and rejects the inevitability of such progress, yet all three films happened. They went through. They depict the Delambrans working through 3 generations and possibly more on the same thing. I guess the profit motive to make more movies is stronger than any message that the studio would try to impart. Oh well, what can you do? I suppose the first movie does end with a somewhat more ambiguous and not so quite black and white message, spoken by Vincent Price.
He was searching for the truth. He almost found a great truth. But for one instant, he was careless.
That's what killed him?
Search for the truth is the most important work in the whole world and the most dangerous.
I should probably say something about the sequels as well. The second film was a quick moneymaker, a quick cash grab, and had no pretense of artistic merit. The first movie was a big success for Fox, so naturally they tried to immediately capitalize on that success by trying to make it a much more sequel, as is tradition. The studio meddled significantly with the second film and removed a lot of the heavy emotional parts that Vincent Price had liked in the script for a lot more of the fly goes around murdering people type of scenes. By all accounts, they completely misunderstood what made the first film work so well. They figured, yeah, it's the fly mask that people care about, so let's give him more of that. It's so blatant, there's not even a reason for there to be a fly in the second movie, but they just kind of forced the issue. It's almost sadistic the way they go about it. On the bright side, there's more Vincent Price in this one, which is always a plus. But in the end, this is just a monster movie with a big monster fly that kills people. Not terrible, actually maybe enjoyable in certain contexts, but I'd say rather forgettable overall. It's astonishing how briefly the actual fly monster appears in the first film, which is called The Fly, about a fly monster. And that's why the first film works so much better, because it's really the human connection that shines through the movie, and perhaps that's also why it's lasted for so long. It's a film about playing God gone wrong, but as already mentioned, it's also a tragic romance movie, which adds an extra layer, an extra element of importance to it. Then you have the third movie, which was made a few years later and was made in England for primarily tax reasons, called Curse of the Fly. And it is an interesting film. I would argue better than the second one. I would at least give it point for originality and ambition. Actually, I would go as far as to say that it has a fantastic opening sequence, a long slow motion scene of a woman in her underwear escaping from an insane asylum. It's stylish, it's mysterious, it establishes a fascinating tone for the rest of the film. However, the rest of the film doesn't quite live up to that, and it's far more run-of-the-mill, filled with cliches, sort of like monster science fiction horror movie. Although again, it does get some points for originality and not forcing another fly monster on us. While the film features a third generation of Delambres still working on the teleporter, it features no fly monster. Other kind of monsters, yeah, sure, but no fly monster, which is strange for a movie in the Fly franchise, but better than to force it on us. So coming closer to the end of the video, this is the segment where I want to introduce a companion for the movie that I'm talking about, and there are several good candidates. The obvious one is of course the 1986 remake by David Cronenberg and starring Jeff Goldblum, which is perhaps superior to the original movie, although it deviates quite a little bit story-wise. While I would consider both movies as a mixture of science fiction and horror, I would lump the first movie, the original 1958 movie, more in the science fiction camp and the remake more in the horror camp. Great movie though it is. Cronenberg loves his body horror, and that's very much the focus on the 1986 remake. It causes quite a bit of a tonal shift, and so I would say because of that, it's maybe not a great companion for the original Fly. It feels quite different when you watch it. A somewhat more unlikely candidate, much more unlikely candidate, is the Japanese film Tetsuo the Iron Man, released in 1989, I believe, which explores some of the same themes as The Fly, albeit in a far more abstract and avant-garde way. Tetsuo, arguably the main character of the film, is overtaken by metal and by technology, and this metal-man hybrid is created. And the film ends with the promise that eventually the whole world will be like that. The director of the film, Shinya Tsukamoto, even cited Cronenberg as a big influence for the film, and there's even a scene, somewhere in the middle, where, very similar to what happened to The Fly, where the main character is sort of like panicked about his transformation and tries to hide this transformation from his girlfriend. They actually two parallel quite well with what happens in the original Fly. However, despite these similarities, again, it's too much of a tonal shift for The Fly to recommend it as a companion. I'm always thinking of double features here, and I don't know that I can imagine watching these two movies one after the other. In the end, the film that I've settled with is The Incredible Shrinking Man, released in 1957, just 1 year prior to The Fly, based on the novel The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson.
The Incredible Shrinking Man.
You are getting smaller. There's no medical precedent for what's happening to you. I simply know that you're getting smaller.
I want you to start thinking about us, our marriage.
In The Incredible Shrinking Man, after being enveloped by a strange mist, our main character Scott begins to inexplicably shrink in size. Nobody can explain it or stop it from happening, while Scott continues to get smaller and smaller while his family tries the best to accommodate his decreasing size. As he grows smaller, he begins to face newer challenges like the house cat or the tyrannical spider that lives in his basement. It's not immediately obvious, but I think this film makes for a great companion with The Fly because it parallels its story and themes very well. Not only are these two a good tonal match, but they also complement each other thematically. Both films are based on well-regarded science fiction stories, and both films reflect what I would consider two great fears that people, or more specifically men, exhibited in the 1950s. First, it's the fear of technology gone too far, which The Fly tackles, and second is sort of this concern over masculinity and its place in a changing culture, which The Incredible Shrinking Man explores. This fear is made actually quite literally in The Shrinking Man through the size of the character's body, which represents his masculinity and his diminishing ability to dominate the surrounding environment. In some ways, both films are about this irrational sort of fear towards emasculation, one from technological progress, in the case of The Fly, and one from maybe cultural progress. Something that is less explored in The Fly, but is definitely a big point in The Shrinking Man, is that these ideas of masculinity and the fears that they lead to are perhaps misguided, and one's value shouldn't come from that, or shouldn't come necessarily from that, or only from that. In The Fly, Andre Delambre had a vision to change the world for the better, but ended up changing himself for the worse. I obviously don't agree with any message that suggests certain progress should be feared or avoided or anything of the sort. It is inevitable one way or another, but I would agree that our relationship with technology is complicated, and our responsibility for how we shape this relationship as we move forward to the uncharted oceans of progress should not be taken lightly. To quote Vincent Price at the end of the movie, "The search for the truth is the most important work in the whole world and the most dangerous." At the very least, we shouldn't let just any madman do unregulated experiments in their basements or whatever the equivalent is in the modern world. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. If you haven't seen the movie, or if you've seen only the Cronenberg version from the 80s, definitely give the original a try. It's a great movie. And even the sequels, despite my criticisms, despite their shortcomings, they're still a lot of fun to watch. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and so forth. You know what to do. Alright, I'll see you next time.